I never thought turning 62 would be the year I'd finally see my husband for who he really was. Not after 35 years of marriage. Not after raising 2 children together, moving cross-country for his career 3 times, and building what everyone called the perfect life in our Connecticut suburb. But sometimes the truth doesn't reveal itself until you're fluent enough to hear it. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Catherine, though most people call me Kate. I spent 40 years working as a librarian at the Greenwich Public Library, a job my husband Michael always introduced, with a gentle pat on my shoulder and the words, "Kate keeps herself busy with books." As if shelving novels was my little hobby, something to fill the hours between making his dinner and maintaining our home. Michael was an art dealer. Import-export, high-end pieces, the kind of work that required travel to Europe, late-night phone calls with collectors, and a sophisticated understanding of markets I apparently couldn't comprehend. "It's complicated, Kate," he'd say whenever I asked about his business. "You wouldn't understand the nuances." I accepted this. I accepted a lot of things. What Michael didn't know, what I'd never thought to mention because he'd never asked, was that my grandmother on my mother's side was Russian. She'd emigrated from St. Petersburg in 1952, married an American, but kept her language alive in our home when I was growing up. Every Sunday, Baba would speak to me only in Russian. She'd teach me poems, read me Pushkin, tell me stories about the Hermitage Museum. By the time I was 12, I was fluent. By the time I was 20 and met Michael, it had become just another part of my past, like my childhood stamp collection or my abandoned piano lessons. In our early years together, I mentioned it once. We were at a dinner party, and someone brought up language learning. "Oh, Kate speaks Russian," I'd said, maybe a little proud. Michael had laughed, that warm laugh everyone loved, and said, "She knows a few phrases from her grandmother. It's charming." Then he'd changed the subject to his recent acquisition of a Chagall sketch. That was the last time I mentioned it. The years passed. The children grew. I worked at my library, organized book clubs, helped patrons find obscure references. I was good at my job, excellent even. I could track down information others couldn't, navigate databases, read between the lines of what people were really asking for. But at home, I was just Kate. Good old Kate. Reliable Kate. Kate who didn't understand complications. It was gradual, so slow I didn't notice until I was already living in it. Michael would come home from a trip to Moscow or Berlin, and I'd ask how it went. "Fine," he'd say. "You wouldn't be interested in the details." I'd suggest we visit the new gallery opening downtown, and he'd smile. "That's more my arena. Why don't you stick to your book clubs?" When I mentioned an article I'd read about authentication fraud in the art market, he'd nodded absently. "I'm sure it was a nice article, honey. After I retired last year, it got worse." I had time now. Time to notice how he'd arrange his schedule around business dinners I wasn't invited to, how he'd take calls in his study with the door closed, how he'd speak about his money and his investments as if my 40 years of supporting his career, raising his children, and managing our household was just background music to his symphony. But I didn't say anything. What would I say? After 35 years, you don't just upend everything because your husband thinks you're simple. Then came the invitation to the Metropolitan Museum's annual benefactor gala. Black tie, $500 a plate, the kind of event Michael attended regularly without me. But this year was different. This year, he came home on a Tuesday evening, loosened his tie, and said, "Kate, I need you to come to the Met Gala next month." I looked up from my book, surprised. "You want me there?" "I need the optics," he said, heading to the liquor cabinet. Bringing a wife. Shows stability. The Vorontsov brothers are flying in from Moscow, and they're old-fashioned about these things. They want to see a man with a solid marriage before they trust him with a $50 million deal. Not "I want you there," not "I'd love your company." Optics. "Of course," I said. "I'll be there." He nodded, pouring himself scotch. "Good. Just smile. Look elegant. Don't worry about the conversation. The Vorontsovs will be speaking Russian most of the evening anyway. I'll handle all the business talk. You just need to look the part." Something flickered in my chest, a small spark of something I hadn't felt in years. "You speak Russian with them?" "I picked up enough for business," he said, pride in his voice. Been working with Eastern European collectors for 15 years now. You have to speak their language in this business. He took a sip. Don't worry, you won't be bored for long. The wives usually stick together anyway. That spark grew a little brighter. I see. Wear the navy Armani, he said. The one with the modest neckline. These are conservative men. We want to make the right impression. The right impression. As if I was a prop, a well-dressed piece of furniture to complete his image. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched him prepare. He practiced Russian phrases at his desk. He studied market reports. He made call after call, his voice animated in ways it never was when he spoke to me. I heard him on the phone with his business partner, Robert, discussing the Vorontsov opportunity. Numbers that made my head spin. Percentages. Offshore accounts. Words like untraceable and private holdings. I didn't ask questions. I went to the salon, had my hair done the way he liked it, elegant silver swept into a chignon. I had the navy Armani altered to fit my 62-year-old body, a body that had birthed his children, a body he now looked past as if it were invisible. I bought new shoes, practiced walking in heels I hadn't worn in years. The night of the gala arrived. Michael looked distinguished in his tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. In the car, he went over the plan. The Vorontsov brothers, Dmitry and Alexei, are serious collectors. This deal could set us up for retirement. Just follow my lead, smile, be pleasant. They'll mostly speak Russian among themselves, so you won't need to engage much. I understand, I said. We arrived at the Met. The grand staircase lit up like something from a film. I took Michael's arm, and we entered the world he'd kept me separate from for decades. Crystal chandeliers, Renaissance paintings, women in gowns that cost more than cars. Michael was in his element, greeting colleagues, air-kissing acquaintances, introducing me as my wife, Kate, with that same proprietary pat on my shoulder. Then I saw them. 2 men, mid-50s, impeccably tailored suits, the kind of presence that made waiters materialize with champagne. The Vorontsov brothers. Michael, the taller one, said in accented English, extending his hand. Good to see you. Dmitry, Alexei, Michael said warmly. May I introduce my wife, Catherine? I extended my hand. Dmitry kissed it, old-world formal. Очень приятно, he said. Very pleased to meet you. I smiled, said nothing, just looked pleasant, as instructed. Shall we find our table? Michael suggested. We were seated in a prime location, near the front, with a view of the podium where various museum officials would make speeches throughout the evening. The table included Michael, me, the Vorontsov brothers, and 2 other couples who were clearly uncomfortable being out of their social depth. Michael dominated the conversation, speaking to the Vorontsovs in a mix of English and broken Russian, gesturing with his wine glass, laughing at jokes I was meant not to understand. I sipped my water and observed. It was what librarians did best. We observed. The speeches began. A museum director talked about acquisitions. A donor discussed preservation. The Vorontsov brothers looked politely bored. Then Dmitry leaned toward Michael and switched fully to Russian. Eti rechi nevynosime, he said. These speeches are unbearable. Michael laughed, replying in halting Russian. Yes, necessary evil, part of the show. And then they kept talking, and I kept listening. At first, it was mundane. Comments about the food, observations about other guests. Dmitry pointed out a woman across the room, made a crude joke. They laughed. I smiled vacantly at my plate. Then Alexei said something that made me freeze. So, Michael, this arrangement you've proposed, you're certain your wife knows nothing? Michael glanced at me. I was studying the floral centerpiece, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Kata? He used the Russian diminutive of my name, something he'd never done in English. She doesn't understand Russian, and she doesn't understand business. Perfect combination. My hand tightened on my water glass. Dmitry chuckled. American women. So different from ours. You have no idea, Michael said, warming to his subject. She spent 40 years in a library, shelving books. That's the extent of her ambition. I've been moving assets for 15 years, and she's never asked a single meaningful question. The offshore accounts? Alexei asked. She thinks we live off my salary and modest investments. She has no idea about the Cayman holdings, the Luxembourg Company, or the properties in Cyprus. Michael took a drink of wine. I've kept everything separate. Her name isn't on anything that matters. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain they could hear it, but I kept my face neutral, kept my eyes on that centerpiece. Dmitri leaned in. And if she finds out? She won't. Michael's voice was certain. Even if she saw the paperwork, she wouldn't understand it. And she'd never challenge me anyway. She's been trained for 35 years to stay in her lane. Books and book clubs. That's her world. Trained. Like a dog. Alexei switched topics to authentication details, discussing paintings and provenance. I learned that they were planning to move pieces through Michael's gallery. Pieces with questionable origins. Pieces that needed creative paperwork. I learned about the Cayman accounts where the real money would flow. I learned about the Cyprus properties, 4 of them, purchased during our marriage with money I didn't know existed. And I learned what my husband really thought of me. Later, when the speeches ended and dancing began, Michael asked me to dance. On the floor, he held me close, smiling down with what others might mistake for affection. "You're doing great, Kate," he said. "The Vorontsovs are impressed with the stable family man image. This is going to work out perfectly." I smiled up at him. "I'm glad I could help. See? I knew you'd be good at this. You just need to show up and look the part." Something in me cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked. We finished the evening, said our goodbyes. In the car, Michael was elated. That went better than I could have hoped. Dmitri basically committed to the partnership right there. "We're talking about a payday that'll set us up for years." He paused. "Well, set me up. You'll be comfortable, of course." "Of course," I echoed. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Michael snore beside me, and I thought about 35 years. 35 years of being patted on the shoulder. 35 years of you wouldn't understand. 35 years of being treated like a pleasant, simple woman whose only value was in looking the part. But I wasn't simple. I'd managed complex database systems at the library. I'd taught myself digital archives when the profession changed. I'd navigated patron disputes, budget crises, board politics. I'd raised 2 children, managed a household, supported a man who now openly discussed hiding assets from me, and I spoke fluent Russian. The next morning, I made Michael his coffee, scrambled his eggs exactly the way he liked them, and kissed him goodbye as he left for work. Then I sat down at my computer and began to research. Offshore accounts, Luxembourg companies, Cyprus property law. I spent hours reading, taking notes in a journal I kept hidden in my closet. I learned about marital assets, about forensic accounting, about how courts handled hidden wealth in divorce proceedings. I called my friend Susan, whose daughter was a divorce attorney in Manhattan. Hypothetically, I said, if someone discovered hidden assets during a marriage, what would they do? Susan gave me her daughter's number. I called Laura, explained I needed a consultation, hypothetically speaking. Laura listened. Then she said, "Mrs. Patterson, nothing about this sounds hypothetical. How much do you know?" I overheard a conversation. In Russian. Details about Cayman accounts, Luxembourg holding companies, Cyprus properties, all acquired during our marriage. "You speak Russian?" "Fluently. My grandmother was from St. Petersburg. And your husband doesn't know this?" "He's never asked." I heard her pen scratching paper. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to need you to write down everything you remember from that conversation. Every detail. Names, numbers, locations. Can you do that?" "I'm a librarian," I said. "Detail is what I do." Over the next 3 months, I documented everything. I became invisible in a new way. Not Michael's invisible, but purposefully transparent. I was the perfect wife, attentive, supportive, uncurious, and all the while, I was listening. Michael had more calls with the Vorontsovs. They'd switched to Russian when discussing sensitive matters, apparently comfortable now that they'd met his harmless wife. I learned about art pieces being moved through shell companies. I learned about the authentication fraud Alexei specialized in. I learned about kickbacks and false appraisals. I wrote it all down. Dates, times, amounts, names of companies. Account numbers Michael mentioned casually, thinking I was upstairs reading, not standing in the hallway with my phone's voice recorder running. Laura worked quietly, hiring a forensic accountant who began tracing the threads. It was remarkable what public records could reveal when you knew what to look for. The Cyprus properties existed, 4 condominiums, purchased over the past 12 years, collectively worth about $8 million. The Luxembourg company was registered, Michael's name buried in layers of corporate structure. The Cayman accounts were harder, but the accountant found references in tax documents, careful analysis of Michael's declared income versus his actual lifestyle. In month 4, Laura called me. "We have enough. More than enough. The question is, what do you want to do?" I thought about that question. 35 years, 2 children, both grown now, living their own lives. A man who'd trained me to be invisible so thoroughly that he'd become blind. "I want a divorce," I said, "and I want what's fair." "Fair might be more than you think," Laura said. "Under Connecticut law, all assets acquired during marriage are subject to equitable division. That includes the assets he hid." "Good. There's something else," Laura said carefully. "Some of what you've described, the authentication fraud, the shell companies used to move questionable pieces that might interest the FBI, art fraud division." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Let's start with the divorce, one thing at a time." I filed on a Monday. Laura had the papers served to Michael at his office, professional and clean. I wasn't there to see his face, but I heard about it later from Robert's wife, who called me, confused and concerned. "Kate, what's going on?" Robert said Michael was served divorce papers. "Yes," I said simply. "But why? You two seemed so happy." "Happy?" I almost laughed. "Things aren't always what they seem." Michael came home that evening, his face red, the papers crumpled in his fist. "What the hell is this?" "I was in the kitchen, making tea. It's a divorce petition." "I can see that. What I want to know is, why?" I turned to face him. This man I'd spent 35 years with, and I felt nothing but a vast, cool distance. Because I deserve better. "Better? Kate, what are you talking about? We have a good life." "You have a good life," I corrected. "I have a performance." He blinked, confused. "This is insane. We can work this out. Whatever's bothering you." "What's bothering me," I said calmly, "is that you've hidden approximately $15 million in assets from me over the course of our marriage. What's bothering me is that you think I'm too simple to notice or care. What's bothering me is 35 years of being treated like a prop in your life story." His face paled. What are you talking about?" "The Cayman accounts, the Luxembourg holding company, the 4 properties in Cyprus." "Shall I go on?" "You can't possibly," he stopped, his mind working. "You went through my papers?" "I didn't need to." "Then how?" "The Met Gala," I said. "When you and the Vorontsov brothers discussed all of this in Russian, thinking I couldn't understand." I watched the realization dawn on his face. Horror, genuine horror. "You speak Russian?" "Fluently. Baba taught me." "Remember Baba? My grandmother you met exactly twice in 35 years? The woman you couldn't be bothered to have a real conversation with?" He sank into a chair. "Kate, listen." "No, Michael. I'm done listening. I've listened for 35 years. Now you're going to listen. You're going to sit down with my attorney, and you're going to disclose every asset, every account, every property, and we're going to divide them fairly." "You can't do this." "I already am." He tried, over the next weeks, to negotiate, to minimize, to explain away the hidden assets as business necessities and tax planning, but Laura and her forensic accountant had built an airtight case. The Cyprus properties alone, purchased with marital funds while Michael claimed we needed to budget carefully, were enough. The Cayman accounts, the Luxembourg company, all of it painted a picture of a man who'd systematically stolen from his own marriage. The divorce took 8 months. In that time, Michael tried everything. Anger, bargaining, tears I didn't believe. He told our children I was being unreasonable, that I was taking advantage of him. Our daughter Emily called me. "Mom," Dad said, "you're trying to take everything he's worked for." "Emily," I said gently, "your father has been hiding millions of dollars from me for years. I'm not taking anything. I'm claiming what's rightfully mine." But he said, "Did he tell you about the 4 condominiums in Cyprus he bought without my knowledge? Did he mention the offshore accounts? Did he explain how he spoke about me to his business partners, calling me too simple to understand his life. Silence. Then, quietly, "No, I love you, sweetheart. And I love your brother. This isn't about you two. This is about me finally understanding my worth." The settlement came through in March. I received half of everything, including the assets Michael had hidden. $4 million. Plus half the house, half his legitimate business holdings, and spousal support that reflected the lifestyle he'd actually been living, not the one he'd pretended we had. I sold the Connecticut house. Too many memories, too many years of being small. I bought a condominium in Manhattan, near the library I'd worked at for 40 years. 2 bedrooms, big windows, a view of Central Park. The FBI came calling about the Vorontsovs. It turned out my recordings, my meticulous notes, were exactly what they needed. Art fraud, money laundering, authentication schemes. I testified before a grand jury. Michael wasn't charged. He'd been careful enough, but his reputation in the art world was destroyed. The Vorontsovs were arrested. The deal fell apart. I started volunteering at the Morgan Library, working with their Russian literature collection. They were thrilled to have someone who could translate rare documents, who understood the cultural context. I began teaching a class on Russian literature at the community center. Every week, 15 people showed up to discuss Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and I realized I'd forgotten how much I loved teaching. Last month, I had lunch with Emily and her brother, James. They'd both come around, understood what their father had done. Emily told me I looked different. "How so?" I asked. "Lighter," she said, "like you're not carrying something heavy anymore." She was right. I wasn't carrying Michael's low expectations. I wasn't carrying 35 years of making myself smaller. I wasn't carrying the weight of being invisible. Yesterday, I got a letter from Michael. Not through lawyers, just a plain envelope with my name in his handwriting. Inside was a single page. "Kate, I never understood what I had. I'm sorry." I read it once, then put it in the drawer with all the other documents from that chapter of my life. The apology didn't change anything. The sorry didn't give me back 35 years. But it did confirm something I'd learned. People reveal who they really are when they think you don't understand. When they think you're too simple, too invisible, too unimportant to notice. They speak freely, carelessly, truthfully. And sometimes, the person they underestimate most is the one paying the closest attention. I'm 63 now. I live alone, but I'm not lonely. I have my books, my classes, my volunteer work. I have friendships I'd neglected during my marriage, relationships I'm rebuilding. I have my children, who respect me in ways they didn't before. And I have my voice, in Russian, in English, in whatever language I choose. If you're listening to this, and you're in a relationship where you feel invisible, where your interests are dismissed, where you're made to feel small, I want you to know something. You're not imagining it. You're not being too sensitive. You're not asking for too much. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be treated as if your thoughts matter, your skills matter, your very existence matters. And if the person who's supposed to love you can't see that, maybe it's time to stop making yourself smaller and start paying attention to what they reveal when they think you're not listening. Because here's what I learned. The same patience that kept me quiet for 35 years, the same careful observation that made me good at my job, the same attention to detail that let me build a case. Those aren't weaknesses. They're strengths. They were always strengths. I just needed to stop letting someone else tell me otherwise.